everybody, I am now well on my way to filming my 1000th video. In case you're wondering, this is about number 961, 962. And in order to keep track of all of these different videos, I have on the channel a number of playlists. So if you like my content and you want to see some more, but only certain videos, that's a good way to try and filter through some of the stuff. There is my Cool Cars for Young People playlist, where I talk about cars that are not only a little bit cheaper to buy, but also cheaper to run and insure as well. Then we have my Lotus playlist, my British cars that are not a Lotus playlist, so on and so forth. But I'm starting to think I really need a playlist that's called, oh yeah, I forgot about those. And in said playlist, you'd certainly find cars like the Passat W8 that I featured at the end of last year. And you'd also find this, its successor, the lesser spotted B6 generation Passat R36, the final Passat to feature a 6-cylinder engine. It really is an oddball car, this, and if you required proof of that, know that there are barely triple digits in the country. There may even be more cars here now than there were when new, because a lot have been imported from Japan. I think I upset a few VAG fans with the W8 video because I called that one of the worst Passats ever made, and people were quick to point out that the B5 was in fact one of the best Passats ever made. I'm not arguing about the merits of the B5, I still think it's a fairly unremarkable car. Yes, a fine piece of engineering, but then so is a breeze block. It doesn't mean I want to sit in a room and stare at it for hours. It was the W8 part of that car that made it so compromised. The R36 is in many ways quite a bit more conventional, but it's also improved in some key areas and dramatically less, well, dramatic to own. And as this is the exact kind of car that I could see somebody trying to convince another half is actually a totally sensible purchase, I will begin this review by talking about all of the sensible and boring stuff. I'm sure you've already spotted that this is not a standard example, and before you leap into the comment section to ask me why I didn't review a standard example, well, that wasn't what I was offered. I was offered this, and I am very grateful to its owner Ben for bringing it out. The truth is that these days, many of both the W8 and the R36 have been modified, either because things broke and an OE replacement was either unavailable or too expensive, or that's just what people wanted to do. In America, it seems like the modding and aftermarket scene is single-handedly keeping interest in the W8 alive, so it's not always the demon that we make it out to be. The B6 Passat had a number of fundamental changes over its predecessor, the biggest being the fact that the engines were now all transverse rather than longitudinal. That is one of the reasons they could no longer put an 8-cylinder engine in here. In truth, getting 8 cylinders into the old Passat was already a mission, and that's why VW resorted to having a W8, and Audi, who used the same platform for the RS4, only got a V6 in there. The majority of R36s sold like this were in estate form, and I've got to say, it's a rather handsome looking car. It's also a very useful size. See, I used to have a BMW 1 Series, and that was just a bit too small. The Mark V Golf I've looked at a number of times, specifically the R32 version, and that has a bit more room inside it than the 1 Series, but not enough extra room to really justify it, because to get a nice one of those now, you're going to be paying about £10,000, and that's the same amount of money that will get you into a decent one of these. In terms of both interior and exterior dimensions, this is a really usefully sized car. It's about 4.8 meters long, making it something like a foot shorter than my Maserati, which in truth is just a little bit too big for many scenarios. The reason I mention that car is because it may be moving on fairly soon, and so I will be needing a new, sensible car. And this could be a very good candidate, because it's a lot cheaper than the Maserati and cheaper to run. However, being cheaper to run than a Maserati isn't really much of a claim to fame, and one of the things about the R36 that isn't so good is its fuel economy. In normal driving, combined average is in the low 20s, according to Ben. On the motorway, if you're being very sensible and you're not in too much of a hurry, over 30 mpg is achievable, but assume that's not going to be something you do very often in a car like this. Being an R36, this car is very well equipped, and there are only a couple of items that it's missing. One being the generally quite excellent DIN audio stereo upgrade, and I've forgotten what the other one is. But this car does have beautiful part leather, part Alcantara or suede seats. They're really quite nice, very supportive, even have adjustable bolsters so they can really hug you if you want them to. I like that inner seat. These are excellent chairs. They've also got memory in them too, so if you've got multiple people driving the car, that's always handy as well. This steering wheel has been re-trimmed. It's a little bit chunky for my liking, but it's got more feel through it than you'd expect. We'll talk about that in a bit. Otherwise, most of the stuff up here is going to be familiar to anyone who's ever been in a Mark V Golf. So things like your Bluetooth now are just a little bit too old to want to talk to many modern phones. However, there are a plethora of systems out there which will be able to replace this and give you much more modern functionality. All of the switchgear in here is pretty familiar VAG from about 15 years ago, which is to say it's functional but unexciting. Black plastic is the order of the day. The rear seats have quite a bit of stowage in them as well and are also quite pretty. However, because the sunroof here is not a panoramic one, the rear is a little bit dark and claustrophobic. Boot space is very good though, and that's quite important for Ben because his most precious cargo is his pair of Huskies, and that's the main reason he bought this car, because previously he had a Lupo, and in the industry standard Husky on the back seat test, a Lupo doesn't score all that well. Total cargo space before you've even dropped a seat is just over 500 litres, which means it should be more than capable of pretty much any day-to-day task. There isn't masses in here for the quirks and feature fiend, but one thing I do really like is the little pop-out keypad for your mobile phone. We'll get back to some more boring stuff in a bit, but before we do, let's talk about some of the more exciting elements of this car. I would be stunned if anyone was even considering an R36 not because of its engine. What is it that we have up front? Well, a 3.6 litre VR6 engine. In case you're not familiar, it's an oddball hybrid between a V6 and a straight 6. In fact, in German, VR very much literally means a straight V. What it actually is a 15-degree V engine, but with everything in one head. I'll show you a picture, it'll explain much better. This is the same configuration that you found in the R32, and in the old Passat W8, you actually had a pair of heads on the engine, because that's what makes it a W. As exotic as the configuration may have been, the old W8 did have some problems though. It put out around 280 horsepower, which doesn't really sound like a lot for a 4-litre 8-cylinder. However, by the standards of the day, for a regular car, that wasn't so bad. This is only a little bit better at around 300 horsepower. However, it was two things that really blunted the W8. First off, the car was heavy. This is no lightweight at around 1.8 tons in the real world, but it's still lighter than the previous one. And worst of all was the fact that although you could get the W8 with a manual gearbox, not many people did. And once you put in the old school automatic, your 0 to 62 time was in excess of 8 seconds. Here, it's just under 6. So that gives you an idea as to just how much quicker this car is. Both of them had an all-wheel drive system. In the W8, it was a Torsen. Here, it's a Haldex. People can argue in the comment section as to which is superior. My personal preference is always going to be for a Torsen. But as you can tell, it's pretty cold out today, and I haven't had any issues with the car thus far. The other thing you get with the R36 is a 6-speed DSG. It's not quite as good as some of the later 7-speed items, including VW's own. However, it's a lot better than the old automatic. One of the things Ben has done is added little paddle extensions to the wheel because, like nearly every VAG product, the paddles by default are absolutely piddly. They're not perfect, but it does make changing gears yourself a lot easier and much more enjoyable. As it happens, the gearbox in general, I quite like. So there we have it. The only way I've managed to get the car's traction control to intervene is to put my foot all the way down in first gear on a patch of ice that's still in the shade. I mentioned earlier that the car wasn't entirely standard, so let's talk about what has changed. As you probably guessed from the pictures, the suspension is not stock. These already came with a lowered, sportier setup by default. This has then had an AP coilover system installed because one of the original shocks failed. This happened before Ben got the car. While it looks the part, I expected it to completely ruin the ride. However, it's actually not so bad. Now, I'm not so sure what it would be like if it was fully laden. I think if you put 3 people on a load of luggage in here, it would struggle. The clearance in the wheel arches is already so delicate that if you go over a big bump, you will scrub off some of the tyre lettering on the side. The tyre lettering and the stickers are maybe a little bit seen for me, but I am respectful of all car cultures. The exhaust too is an item I thought would be absolutely horrendous because I looked at the tips and thought, oh no. This is again something that Ben did not do to the car, but what he has done is remove the central resonator. This may sound rather counterintuitive, but he said by doing that it actually made this far less drony. At very low speeds, 20 or 30, you will get the occasional drone in the cabin, but changing gear will almost certainly get rid of that. They've got a little J-pipe system at the back, which he said has really improved things, and even when you're absolutely on it, this isn't too loud. I'd probably have it a touch quieter again because that's part of the whole sort of sleeper image, but the sound it makes is very pleasant. Exhausts can alter the tone of these quite dramatically. This one has more of that traditional V6 howl rather than a straight 6 rasp. I'll confess I didn't have particularly high expectations of the car's dynamics, but it's actually impressing me. Though there is no real texture or feedback through the wheel, the weighting is pleasant and the action is quite direct. The brakes similarly can be a little bit spongy initially, but at no point in time have they failed to give me anything other than exactly what I asked for. Now we're back in town, let's talk about some more of the boring stuff. In terms of reliability, this car is a world apart from the old W8. There are some issues, but most of them are actually ones common to all VWs of the time. So the mechatronic unit in the DSG gearbox can fail, and once upon a time that was a really expensive fix. Now there are plenty of companies out there who can rebuild it, and you'd be looking at around £700 to £1,000 or so to fix that. Suspension bushings and things can wear out. That's something common to any car of this size and age. The engines themselves have proven to be quite reliable, as has most of the rest of the car. In the 4 years that he's had it, Ben has only had a couple of issues. First was a fuel sender failure, which meant the car had absolutely no idea how much petrol was actually in it. The second, and this unfortunately is a repeat offender, is the automatic parking brake. That has a tendency to go on and not want to come off. This has happened twice now, and in one event did actually strand him. That would take the shine off a car, I think. Usually when I get to this section of the route, if I'm driving a car that's an automatic, I will put it back into automatic. But this DSG box is so nice to use and so smooth, I'm actually quite happy changing gears myself. It's a shame it doesn't have an extra ratio. That would be helpful and probably improve the car's motorway manners, but it's actually doing a pretty good job. Being a naturally aspirated lump, it's not the torquiest, around 266 pound-foot, which is some 360 newton-meters. For that reason, if you want to make particularly swift progress, you are going to have to use all of the revs. Not that there are many, because before 7,000 you will have already found the red line. It is a shame the car cracks and pops as much as it does. This is something Ben also doesn't like, and we don't think anyone has actually programmed those in. It may just be a function of what happens when you put a sportier exhaust on one of these cars. The R36 is also one of those cars that falls into that nice category of being both reasonably common as a Passat, but also quite rare as an R36, which means the majority of parts you're ever likely to need should be more Passat than R36, meaning nothing should be that extortionate. A good dose of rarity is also helpful in making sure that the value of the car stays where it is. As the V6 was in production from 2005 to 2010, I would wager good money that a majority of them sold here in the UK may well have been the diesels, because that was the height really of diesel mania. And nowadays you'll find those are the cars that absolutely nobody wants. The petrol is far more desirable. Perfectly honest with you, the biggest thing that I could criticize about this car is the fact that it is just a VAG product. That's it really. You sit in here and you may as well be in a Golf or pretty much anything else they made at the time. There's nothing really to make it stand out. But it's for exactly that reason that it'd probably appeal to a lot of people, including myself. They did a blue specific to the R36, and an estate version of one of those I think I'm going to give some very serious consideration as my next sensible car. So there we have it. And just to annoy Porsche fans, I'm now going to pronounce VW properly. Volkswagen. If I wanted to show off, I could even do the numbers properly. And anyone who speaks German will tell you that numbers are very confusing indeed. 36. 6 and 30. Those crazy Germans. They're so funny. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.